Chapter 1. The Migraine and the Miracle. The first thing Luo Ming became aware of was the headache. It was a deep, throbbing pressure behind his eyes, as if someone had used his skull as a drum. The second thing was the surface his cheek was pressed against, cold, hard, and vaguely sticky. A desk. A high school desk. What the hell? He'd been a 22-year-old graphic designer, not a teenager. The last thing he remembered was falling asleep on his own comfortable, ergonomic bed after a 14-hour workday. Then, the information hit him like a truck. It wasn't a memory, but a download. A torrent of plot points, character bios, and dramatic scenarios flooded his brain. He was no longer Luo Ming, the tired designer. He was Luo Ming, a character in a trashy high school novel he'd skimmed out of boredom. The villain. The bully. A one-dimensional jerk whose sole purpose was to make the life of the novel's hero, the cold and aloof school grass Gui Chen, miserable until he was inevitably and publicly humiliated in front of the entire school. You gotta be kidding me. He lifted his head slowly, the fluorescent lights of the classroom stabbing his eyes. The original Luo Ming's last act had been to tamper with Gu Yichen's graded exam paper, swapping it with a failing one. It was a transparent, childish prank that was about to be exposed, setting the stage for his first major defeat. Luo Ming looked at the boy sitting 2 rows ahead and 1 seat over. Gu Yichen. Even from behind, he was annoyingly perfect. Straight spine, crisp white shirt, hair that probably defied physics by looking artfully tousled, yet perfectly in place. He was the human equivalent of a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. High quality, expensive, and likely to keep you awake with anxiety. The teacher was droning on about the exam, and Luo Ming could feel the tension in the air. The moment of reckoning was coming. He saw a smug, expectant look on the face of one of the original bully's cronies, waiting for the drama to unfold. And in that instant, Luo Ming made a decision. It wasn't born of strategy or a desire to rewrite the plot. It was born of pure, unadulterated exhaustion. He couldn't be bothered. He simply couldn't. The effort of maintaining a rivalry, of sneering and plotting and seething with jealousy, it sounded more tiring than his old job. The original Luo Ming had probably expended thousands of calories a day just on being angry. The new Luo Ming didn't have that kind of energy. So, he did the only thing that made sense. He yawned, a huge, jaw-cracking yawn that drew a few confused glances. He then pulled the hood of his gray sweatshirt over his head, tightened the drawstrings until only the tip of his nose was visible, and lowered his head onto his folded arms. He was asleep before the teacher even finished handing back the papers. For Gui Chen, the moment was anticlimactic. He had felt the familiar prickle of animosity on his back all morning. He knew Luo Ming had done something. The failed exam paper with his name on it was a dead giveaway. He was ready. He had his calm, cutting rebuttal prepared. He was going to expose the pathetic attempt with a single, withering look. The entire class was bracing for the weekly spectacle. Then he turned around. Luo Ming wasn't glaring at him. He wasn't sharpening a pencil with malicious intent. He was a lump, a gray-hoodied lump on a desk, making a soft whistling sound with every breath. Gui Chen blinked. He waited for the prank, for the setup. Nothing. The teacher called his name, and he accepted his real, high-scoring paper. The whole affair resolved without a single word from his so-called nemesis. Throughout the rest of the class, his gaze kept drifting back to the sleeping figure. The rise and fall of his shoulders was steady, peaceful. A stray lock of dark hair had escaped the hood and curled against the desk. Gui Chen found himself staring at it, wondering what it would feel like. It looked soft. He shook his head, annoyed at himself. This was a new tactic, surely. A psychological game. But as the bell rang and the lump didn't move, as students filed out and still the lump didn't stir, Gui Chen walked past his desk. He paused. He looked at the peaceful, sleeping face half hidden by the hood. The boy's brow was smooth, his lips slightly parted. He looked utterly, completely at ease. A strange, unfamiliar feeling tugged at Gui Chen's chest. It wasn't anger or suspicion. It was curiosity, and that inexplicable, startling urge to brush that stray lock of hair away from his face. He didn't. He shoved his hands in his pockets and walked out of the classroom, more unsettled than any confrontation could have ever made him feel. Chapter 2. A Nuisance Named Guichen. Over the next few days, Luo Ming perfected his new life philosophy. It was simple, elegant, and required minimal effort. Sleep through everything. He slept through morning classes. He slept through the break between classes, his head simply moving from one desk to the next. He slept through lunch, ignoring the rumbles of his stomach in favor of the far more appealing call of unconsciousness. His former gang of bullies, a trio of wannabe tough guys, tried to approach him. "Bro, what's the plan? You gonna mess with his books again?" One of them, a pimple-faced kid named Zheng, whispered during a history lecture. Luo Ming slowly lifted his head, his eyes barely slits. "Who?" "Guichen, the school grass. Your mortal enemy." Zheng hissed, exasperated. Luo Ming stared at him for a long, blank moment. The effort of forming a sentence felt monumental. "Sounds like a lot of work," he mumbled. "Nap time," and his head thunked back onto the desk. Zheng and the others exchanged bewildered glances. Their leader had officially gone rogue. Guichen, meanwhile, was experiencing a new form of torture, boredom and intrigue in equal measure. The silence was maddening. He had been braced for a lifelong rivalry, a constant, low-level war of attrition. Instead, he got a sleeping beauty. He found his focus shattered. He'd be solving a complex equation, and his mind would wander. Is he still asleep? How can anyone sleep through Mr. Zhang's monotone? Is that comfortable? During a particularly tedious physics lecture, he gave in to the impulse. He crumpled a small piece of scrap paper into a ball and, with a flick of his wrist, tossed it at Luo Ming's desk. It bounced off the gray hoodie and landed silently on the floor. No reaction, not a twitch, nothing. Guichen felt a sharp sting of disappointment. It was absurd. He was disappointed that his enemy hadn't reacted to a piece of paper. He tried again during the next class, a little harder. The paper ball hit Luo Ming right on the hood. It was a direct hit. Luo Ming slowly raised one hand from under the desk, made a vague brushing motion over his hood as if shooing a fly, and then went limp again. A snort of laughter escaped Guichen before he could stop it. A few heads turned, shocked. The cold, stoic Guichen had just laughed at nothing. He quickly masked his face, but inside, something had shifted. The game had changed. It was no longer about rivalry. It was about understanding the puzzle that was Luo Ming. The first fated encounter from the original plot occurred in the library. In the book, Luo Ming was supposed to corner Guichen and deliver a clumsy threat. This time, Guichen found Luo Ming slumped in a corner chair, a book open on his chest that he was clearly not reading. This was his chance. He walked over and stood in front of him, casting a shadow. "You," Guichen said, his voice low and cold. Luo Ming's eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused for a moment, then settled on Guichen's face. There was no hatred there, no anger. Just the dazed confusion of a woken cat. "What's your game?" Guichen demanded. "The silent treatment? Ignoring me? What are you planning?" Luo Ming stared at him. He watched Guichen's perfectly sculpted lips move, forming words that seemed to require an enormous amount of energy to process. He registered the intensity in the other boy's eyes, the rigid set of his shoulders. All that tension, all that drama. Luo Ming let out a long, slow sigh. He pushed himself up slightly in the chair, his voice a sleep-rough murmur. "You're loud. Your voice, it's very shouty. It's nap time." He stood up, gently moved the stunned Guichen aside, and shuffled out of the library, presumably to find a more peaceful spot. Guichen stood there for a full minute, frozen. No one had ever called him loud before, and no one had ever just walked away from him. He was utterly, completely, and inexplicably captivated. Chapter 3. The Bribe. Guichen's curiosity quickly evolved into something more focused. He became an amateur sleepologist, with Luo Ming as his sole subject. He started a mental catalog. Luo Ming preferred to sleep on his left side. When a teacher mentioned calculus, his brow would furrow slightly, as if even his subconscious was offended. When the teacher mentioned literature, a tiny, peaceful smile would sometimes grace his lips. He slept through all of his classes, which meant he was failing all of his classes. Gui Chen checked the grades posted on the classroom wall. Luo Ming's scores were a disaster zone. A string of 20s, 30s, and one glorious 15 in math. It was almost impressive. The opportunity to intervene came sooner than expected. Their homeroom teacher, a well-meaning but frazzled woman, had finally had enough. She watched Luo Ming sleep through another of her lessons and snapped. Luo Ming, that's it. You will stay after school today for extra tutoring, and you will not leave until you have completed at least 3 practice problems. Luo Ming surfaced from his hoodie like a sleepy turtle, his expression one of pure, existential dread. Extra tutoring meant no nap. It meant effort. Gui Chen saw the look of horror on his face and felt a ridiculous surge of protectiveness. Before he could think, his hand was in the air. "Teacher," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I can tutor him. It will be more efficient. I can explain the material in a way he might understand." The entire class went silent. The school grass, offering to tutor his bully? The teacher looked as shocked as everyone else, but the logic was sound. Gui Chen was the top student. "Why, yes, all right, Gui Chen. That's very responsible of you." Luo Ming shot Gui Chen a look that was half glare, half plea. "Why?" It seemed to say, "Why are you doing this to me?" An hour later, they were alone in the empty classroom. The sun was starting its slow descent, casting long, orange shadows across the desks. Gui Chen had pulled his chair next to Luo Ming's and had a textbook open. "Okay," Gui Chen began, pointing to a problem. "If x equals 7, then you just need to substitute it into the equation. 2x plus 5 becomes 2 times 7 plus 5. Luo Ming stared at the numbers. They looked like ants. Angry, confusing ants. His eyelids were already drooping, weighed down by the sheer boredom of the symbols. "Luo Ming, are you listening?" Luo Ming hummed, a non-committal sound of protest. Gui Chen sighed. He watched as Luo Ming's head began its inevitable descent towards the desk. But this time, Gui Chen didn't let him get there. His hand shot out, and he gently caught Luo Ming's chin, halting his fall. Luo Ming's eyes snapped open, wide with surprise. Gui Chen's heart stuttered. The skin of Luo Ming's jaw was warm under his fingers. Their faces were suddenly very close. He could see the individual lashes framing those sleep-hazy eyes. His original intention, to force him to pay attention, evaporated. Instead, he used his other hand to push Luo Ming's hood back, slowly, carefully, revealing his entire face for the first time. He looked at the slightly confused, slightly vulnerable expression. "At least look like you're trying," Gui Chen murmured, his voice barely a whisper, completely losing the cold edge it usually had. Luo Ming's eyes, unfocused and deep brown, fluttered open a bit wider. For a suspended second, they just looked at each other. The empty classroom, the slanting sunlight, the gentle touch, it all created a bubble of strange, intense intimacy. Luo Ming could see a flicker of something vulnerable in Gui Chen's usually guarded eyes. Gui Chen could see nothing but soft, sleepy acceptance in Luo Ming's. Then Luo Ming's eyes fluttered closed again, and he gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, his chin still resting in Gui Chen's palm. He wasn't fighting it. Gui Chen slowly, reluctantly, let his hand fall away. He cleared his throat, his ears burning. "Right. Problem 1. Let's try again." He didn't get through problem 1. Within 5 minutes, Luo Ming was fast asleep on his desk. But this time, Gui Chen didn't feel annoyed. He just watched the gentle rise and fall of his back, the way the fading sunlight gilded the edges of his dark hair. He felt a profound sense of peace. He pulled his textbook closer and started to study, perfectly content in the quiet company of his sleeping rival. Chapter 4. The Pillow Fort. The after-school tutoring sessions became an unspoken routine. Every day, when the final bell rang, Gui Chen would find himself walking towards Luo Ming's desk. He never asked, and Luo Ming never refused. They would simply end up sitting together in the quiet classroom. Academically, they were a complete failure. Gui Chen would explain a concept. Luo Ming's head would start to bob. Gui Chen would poke him. Luo Ming would mumble, 30 seconds later, he'd be out cold. Gui Chen tried changing his approach, using a softer voice, a more engaging tone. It was like trying to reason with a very attractive brick wall. The moment the topic turned academic, Luo Ming's brain simply shut down to preserve energy. But in every other way, the sessions were a resounding success. Gui Chen found that he studied better with Luo Ming there. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the other boys' quiet breathing, a soothing white noise that helped him focus. He felt more relaxed than he had in years. One day, he noticed Luo Ming wincing as he used his rolled-up jacket as a pillow, shifting to find a comfortable angle for his neck. It looked deeply uncomfortable. That evening, Gui Chen found himself in his family's massive, walk-in linen closet, staring at a shelf of decorative pillows. He felt ridiculous. He was the school grass, the academic king, sneaking a pillow for the boy who was supposed to hate him. He chose a small, firm, navy blue cushion, elegant but unassuming. The next day, before Luo Ming arrived, he placed it on his desk. Luo Ming shuffled in, his hood already up, ready for his post-school coma. He stopped at his desk. He stared at the pillow. He looked at Gui Chen, who was already engrossed in a textbook, his face carefully neutral. He looked back at the pillow. A slow, lazy smile spread across Luo Ming's face. It wasn't a smirk or a sarcastic grin. It was a genuine, unguarded, and devastatingly sweet smile that reached his sleep-heavy eyes. "Thanks," he mumbled, his voice rough. He immediately sat down, placed his head on the perfect pillow, and was asleep within seconds. The word hung in the air between them, a tiny, precious gift. Gui Chen stared at his textbook, but the words were a blur. All he could see was that smile. The following week, emboldened by the success of the pillow, Gui Chen escalated. The classroom could get chilly in the late afternoon. He brought a soft, charcoal-gray throw blanket from home. It was cashmere. He waited until Luo Ming was settled, his head on the pillow. Then, as casually as if he'd done it 1,000 times, he stood up, unfolded the blanket, and draped it carefully over Luo Ming's shoulders, tucking the edges around him. The door to the classroom swung open. A student from the year below, a wide-eyed freshman, had come to retrieve a forgotten book. He froze in the doorway. The scene before him was surreal. The notoriously cold and aloof Gui Chen, the school grass, was gently tucking a blanket around the school's most notorious sleeping bully, his expression soft, focused, and infinitely tender. The freshman gasped. Gui Chen's head snapped up. For a split second, his eyes flashed with the familiar coldness. But then he saw the shock on the kid's face. He simply raised a finger to his lips. "Shoo." The message was clear. Don't you dare wake him. The freshman nodded mutely, grabbed his book, and fled, his entire worldview permanently altered. Gui Chen sat back down, a tiny, secret smile playing on his own lips as he listened to the soft, even breathing from the cashmere-wrapped lump beside him. Chapter 5. The Rooftop Sanctuary. The story of the pillow and the blanket spread through the school like wildfire. The cold school grass and the sleeping bully became an inseparable, albeit silent pair. The whispers were mostly curious, some were confused, and a few were malicious. The malicious ones came from the remnants of Luo Ming's old gang. They felt abandoned, their former leader now seemingly the pet of their enemy. They saw it as a betrayal. The original plot, sensing its last chance, tried to reassert itself. They cornered Luo Ming after school one day, before he could make his way to the usual classroom. Zheng and his 2 cronies blocked his path to the staircase. Well, Zheng sneered. If it isn't Gui Chen's new little lapdog, following him around, letting him dress you up, it's pathetic. Luo Ming looked at them. He felt no anger, just a profound sense of annoyance. These guys were like mosquitoes, buzzing and annoying, but ultimately not worth the energy it would take to swat them. "Where's your spine, huh? Gonna cry to your new boyfriend?" Another one jeered, stepping closer. Before Luo Ming could even formulate a sarcastic reply, a cold voice cut through the air from behind them. "He won't need to." Gu Yichen stepped out from the stairwell. His face was a mask of Arctic fury, his eyes chips of ice as he surveyed the three bullies. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You have 5 seconds to remove yourselves from my sight," he said, his tone flat and utterly terrifying. "Or I will ensure the principal receives a detailed account of every single rule you've broken this semester, complete with timestamps and photographic evidence from the hallway cameras." The three bullies paled. They knew Gu Yichen didn't make empty threats. They scrambled away, muttering curses, leaving Luo Ming and Gu Yichen alone in the sudden silence. Gu Yichen's gaze softened as it landed on Luo Ming. He walked forward and, without a word, grabbed Luo Ming's wrist. His grip was firm, almost possessive. He pulled him past the stairwell, up another flight of stairs, and then through a heavy, unmarked door. They emerged onto the school rooftop. It was a hidden sanctuary. The air was fresh and cool. The sky was a breathtaking canvas of orange, pink, and purple as the sun began its final descent. An old, worn wooden bench sat near the edge, overlooking the school grounds. Gu Yichen finally let go of his wrist. He turned to Luo Ming, his expression no longer cold, but intense. "You don't have to deal with them," he said, his voice softer than Luo Ming had ever heard it. "Not ever. They're beneath you." He gently, almost reverently, pushed Luo Ming down to sit on the bench. "Just sleep," he murmured. "I'll keep watch." Luo Ming looked up at him. He saw the genuine concern, the fierce protectiveness, the raw emotion in those usually guarded eyes. He saw how much Gu Yichen cared. It was a warmth that spread through his chest, far more effective than any cashmere blanket. It wasn't just about the naps anymore. It was about him. Without a word, Luo Ming leaned to the side and rested his head on Gu Yichen's shoulder. He felt the other boy tense for a second, then relax completely. Gu Yichen's arm came up, hesitantly at first, then settled around Luo Ming's waist, holding him gently. Luo Ming closed his eyes. The sunset was beautiful, but the steady beat of Gu Yichen's heart against his ear was better. His breathing slowed, and he fell asleep, safe and warm in his sanctuary, with his guardian watching over him. Chapter 6. Fever and Forgiveness. The sanctuary of the rooftop couldn't protect Luo Ming from everything. A sudden cold front swept through the city, and Luo Ming, in his usual state of oblivious slumber, had walked home in nothing but his thin hoodie. The next morning, he was a disaster. He made it to his desk, but he wasn't sleeping. He was shivering, his face pale except for 2 bright spots of fever on his cheeks. He tried to curl into himself, but a deep, bone-aching chill prevented any kind of rest. He just sat there, miserably trembling, his eyes squeezed shut. The former bully in him would have hidden this weakness at all costs. The new him just didn't have the energy to care. He felt like death. Gu Yichen noticed immediately. He always did. But this wasn't the peaceful sleep he was used to. This was distress. He got up from his seat and walked over, ignoring the curious stares. He knelt beside Luo Ming's desk and pressed the back of his hand against his forehead. It was scorching, his brow furrowed with deep, genuine concern. "You're burning up," he said, his voice tight. Luo Ming just whimpered softly, a tiny, pitiful sound that twisted something in Gu Yichen's chest. Gu Yichen straightened up. He walked to the front of the class, where the teacher was setting up. "Luo Ming is sick. I'm taking him to the infirmary." It wasn't a request. He went back to Luo Ming's desk, carefully pulled the sick boy's arm over his shoulders, and hoisted him up. Luo Ming leaned heavily against him, his head lolling against Gu Yichen's neck. They walked out of the classroom, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The school nurse took one look at Luo Ming's flushed face and ordered him to lie down on one of the narrow cots. Gu Yichen helped him settle, pulling a thin blanket over him. Luo Ming curled into a fetal position, still shivering. The nurse said he just needs to sleep it off. Gu Yichen said, more to himself than to anyone else. "You should get back to class," the nurse suggested. "No." And that was that. Gu Yichen pulled a chair next to the cot and sat down. He stayed there all afternoon. He watched Luo Ming's fitful sleep, the way his brow would furrow and then smooth out. When his shivering intensified, Gui Chen took off his own school blazer and draped it over the thin blanket. When his forehead was beaded with sweat, Gui Chen found a cloth, wet it with cool water from the small sink, and carefully dabbed his forehead, his cheeks, the nape of his neck. Hours later, as the afternoon light began to fade, Luo Ming's eyes fluttered open. They were still glassy with fever, but more aware than they had been all day. He turned his head and saw Gu Yichen sitting there, his perfect hair slightly disheveled, a look of pure exhaustion and worry on his face. And he saw that Gu Yichen was holding his hand. His long, elegant fingers were wrapped loosely around Luo Ming's, his thumb resting on his palm. "You're an idiot," Gu Yichen whispered, his voice cracking with relief. But as he said it, his thumb began to move, stroking slow, soothing circles into Luo Ming's clammy palm. Luo Ming felt a wave of emotion, so strong it almost eclipsed the fever. No one had ever taken care of him like this. In his old life, he'd always been alone. He looked at Gu Yichen, at the vulnerability in his eyes, the gentle touch of his hand. A weak, grateful smile touched Luo Ming's lips. He squeezed Gu Yichen's hand back, as hard as his feverish body would allow. The gesture said everything. "I see you. Thank you. I'm here." The label of enemies dissolved completely in that quiet, sterile room, replaced by something far more profound and terrifyingly new. Chapter 7. The Confession in the Classroom. A week later, Luo Ming was fully recovered, but the dynamic between them had irrevocably shifted. The napping and the quiet companionship had evolved into something tangible and electric. The stolen glances were longer now, lingering. The accidental touches, a brush of fingers when passing a book, a hand on the small back to guide someone through a doorway, were more deliberate, charged with a current that neither of them dared to name. For Gu Yichen, it was torture. He had never felt this way before, this constant, aching awareness of another person. He found himself staring at Luo Ming's lips when he yawned, at the way his throat moved when he swallowed. His carefully constructed walls of cold indifference had crumbled, and in their place was a raw, terrifying vulnerability. He was completely, hopelessly in love with a boy who just wanted to sleep. Luo Ming, for his part, was a master of nonchalance. But even he couldn't hide from the truth. He found himself missing Gu Yichen during the weekends. He'd catch himself smiling for no reason. He was waiting for Gu Yichen, the ever-calculating genius, to finally figure out the one equation he couldn't solve, his own heart. The moment came during another tutoring session. The sun was setting, painting the classroom in hues of gold and amber. Luo Ming, as usual, had succumbed to the allure of his pillow, his head resting peacefully on the desk. Gu Yichen wasn't studying. He was just watching him, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Luo Ming stirred. He could feel the weight of Gu Yichen's gaze. He blinked his eyes open, still hazy with sleep. He found Gu Yichen leaning over him. One arm was braced on the back of Luo Ming's chair, the other on the desk, effectively caging him in. His face was close, his expression a mixture of desperation and fierce determination. "I don't care about your stupid plan anymore," Gu Yichen said, his voice low and tight with emotion. The words tumbled out, unstoppable. "I don't care who you were supposed to be. Why is it that the only time I feel at peace is when you're asleep next to me? Why is it that all I think about is you? Your stupid hoodie, the way you mumble in your sleep, the way you smile when you're half-conscious. It's you. It's always been you." His confession hung in the warm air between them. He looked terrified, as if he'd just laid his soul bare and expected it to be rejected. Luo Ming, still swimming in the gentle waves of half-sleep, felt no fear, no hesitation, only a deep, overwhelming sense of finally. He looked at the boy who had given him pillows and blankets, who had protected him from bullies and held his hand through a fever. The boy who had seen him, truly seen him, when all he wanted to do was disappear. He reached up, his movements slow and sleepy, and cupped Gu Yichen's cheek. His skin was warm. He felt the slight stubble, the sharp line of his jaw. He saw the way Gui Chen's eyes widened, then softened, then stopped thinking. Luo Ming murmured, his voice a sleep-rough whisper. He tightened his grip on Gui Chen's cheek and gently pulled him down. Their lips met. It was soft, slow, and a little clumsy, a first kiss that tasted faintly of the peppermint tea Gui Chen had been drinking and the unique, sleepy warmth of Luo Ming. It was tentative at first, a question. Then Gui Chen let out a shaky breath against his mouth, and the kiss deepened, becoming something more certain, more urgent. Hidden in the empty classroom after sunset, wrapped in the golden light and the quiet, they held onto each other and kissed like they were the only two people in the world. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads resting together, Gui Chen let out a shaky laugh. I've been wanting to do that for weeks. Luo Ming smiled, his eyes already drooping again, but his hand still resting on Gui Chen's cheek. Good job, he mumbled. Now, nap time for real. And he promptly fell asleep, right there, his head now resting comfortably on Gui Chen's shoulder. Gui Chen just shook his head, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy on his face, and held him close, watching the sunset paint his sleeping boyfriend in shades of gold. Chapter 8. The New Routine. 3 months later. The original plot of the novel was a distant, laughable memory, like a bad dream that faded with the morning light. There had been no public humiliation, no dramatic downfall orchestrated by a vengeful hero. Just the quiet, steady rhythm of two boys falling asleep on each other, metaphorically and increasingly literally. Luo Ming was still failing math. This was an immutable law of the universe, as fixed as gravity or the fact that his gray hoodie was perpetually lost somewhere in Gui Chen's room. He simply could not summon the mental energy to care about quadratic equations when there were so many more interesting things to look at, like the way Gui Chen's brow furrowed when he was frustrated, or the way his lips moved when he explained a problem for the 5th time. But now he had a very dedicated, very handsome private tutor who got even more easily distracted than he did. They were in Gui Chen's room on a Saturday afternoon, a space that had become as familiar to Luo Ming as his own. It was pristine, organized, and smelled faintly of sandalwood and the expensive cologne Gui Chen used. Luo Ming had immediately claimed the large, comfortable armchair by the window, curling up in it like a cat. Okay, Gui Chen said, sitting on the edge of his bed with a textbook open on his lap. Geometry. Proofs. We're going to get through at least 2 today. Luo Ming made a non-committal sound from the depths of the armchair. His eyes were already at half-mast, watching Gui Chen through his lashes. Luo Ming. Focus. I am focused, Luo Ming murmured. I'm focused on you. Gui Chen's ears pinked. That's not. You're supposed to be focused on the triangle. There's a triangle? Luo Ming asked, his voice dripping with faux innocence. Where? Gui Chen threw a pillow at him. It bounced off Luo Ming's hoodie and landed on the floor. Luo Ming didn't even move to pick it up. He just smiled that slow, sleepy smile that always made Gui Chen's heart do strange things. You're impossible, Gui Chen sighed, but he was already closing the textbook. He knew when he was defeated. He got up, walked over to the armchair, and looked down at his impossibly annoying, impossibly adorable boyfriend. Scoot over. Luo Ming shifted, and Gui Chen squeezed into the armchair next to him. It was a tight fit, but neither of them complained. Luo Ming immediately leaned against him, his head finding its natural resting place on Gui Chen's shoulder. This is better than triangles, Luo Ming mumbled. Gui Chen pressed a kiss to the top of his head. You're going to fail your exams. Worth it. They sat like that for a long time, the afternoon sun warming them through the window. Gui Chen's arm wrapped around Luo Ming's waist, holding him close. He listened to the soft, even breathing that told him Luo Ming had fallen asleep again. And he smiled, because this quiet, peaceful intimacy was worth more than any perfect score. To the rest of the school, Gui Chen remained the cold, untouchable genius. He still walked the halls with perfect posture and a neutral expression. He still answered teachers' questions with crisp precision. He still intimidated underclassmen with a single glance. But those who looked closely, really closely, would see the subtle changes. They would see the way his eyes would soften, just for a fraction of a second, when a certain gray hoodie walked into the classroom. They would see the ghost of a smile that would appear when his phone buzzed with a message that simply said nap, or hungry, or on one memorable occasion, dreamed about you. You were explaining math. It was a nightmare. They would notice that he always seemed to have an extra blanket in his bag, or a warm drink from the vending machine that he would wordlessly place on Luo Ming's desk before the first period even started. They would see them at lunch, sitting together in their usual corner of the cafeteria. Gu Yichin eating his perfectly balanced meal. Luo Ming asleep with his head on the table, using Gu Yichin's folded jacket as a pillow. The rumors had died down eventually. When it became clear that the two of them were just them, a unit, a pair, the way some things in nature simply belong together, the gossip lost its flavor. Even Zheng and his cronies had learned to keep their distance, intimidated less by Gu Yichin's cold threats and more by the simple, unassailable fact that Luo Ming just didn't care enough to be bullied anymore. They walked home together every day now. It was an unspoken rule, as natural as breathing. Even when Gu Yichin had student council meetings or extra classes, Luo Ming would wait. He'd find a bench somewhere, pull his hood up, and take a quick nap until his boyfriend was free. They always took the long way, through the park where the cherry blossoms had bloomed and shed their petals and were now just ordinary green trees. The path was quiet, lined with benches where elderly couples sat and children chased pigeons. It was their time. Today, their hands were loosely intertwined, fingers brushing, a comfortable, silent communication. Gu Yichin was, predictably, still trying to teach. The substitution method really isn't that hard, he was saying, gesturing with his free hand. You just isolate the variable in one equation and then plug it into the other. It's like a puzzle. Luo Ming hummed, a non-committal sound that meant he was absolutely not listening. He was focused on the feeling of Gu Yichin's pinky finger linked with his own, the warmth of his palm, the way the late afternoon sun caught the highlights in his dark hair. It was infinitely more interesting than algebra. Luo Ming, are you even listening? Absolutely. Luo Ming lied, his voice dreamy. Gu Yichin stopped walking and turned to face him, one eyebrow raised. Really? What did I just say? Luo Ming blinked at him slowly, like a cat considering whether to acknowledge its owner. You said something about puzzles. And numbers. And me. You definitely said something about me. A laugh escaped Gu Yichin before he could stop it, a genuine, unguarded sound that made a group of passing schoolgirls whip their heads around in shock. The cold school grass laughing? In public? You're ridiculous, Gu Yichin said, but his eyes were soft, fond, utterly besotted. You like it, Luo Ming countered. I do, Gu Yichin admitted quietly. I really do. They started walking again, shoulders brushing. The park gave way to a quiet residential street, and then to the crosswalk where they always parted ways. Gu Yichin to his family's luxury apartment complex, Luo Ming to his small but cozy studio apartment a few blocks further. They stopped at the crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. The evening air was cool and sweet, carrying the faint scent of someone's dinner cooking nearby. The street was quiet, just the two of them and the rhythmic blinking of the pedestrian signal. Luo Ming looked at Gu Yichin, really looked, at his profile illuminated by the soft glow of a street lamp, the slight furrow in his brow as he mentally continued to explain the math problem in his head. He was so perfectly, adorably serious. Always thinking, always calculating, always trying to solve the next puzzle. Except for when he was with Luo Ming. Then he just was. Luo Ming tugged on their joined hands. Gu Yichin turned, a question in his eyes. Luo Ming stepped closer, close enough that their chests were almost touching. He reached up with his free hand and cupped Gu Yichin's cheek, just like he had that day in the classroom. Gu Yichin's eyes fluttered slightly, his breath catching. Thanks for the lesson, Luo Ming whispered, his voice soft and rough with affection. And then he pulled him close and gave him a kiss. It wasn't like their first kiss, tentative, questioning, hidden away in an empty classroom. This was confident, assured, a statement of fact. It was warm and slow and tasted faintly of the honey candy Luo Ming had been sucking on. It was a kiss that said, "You're mine. I'm yours. This is us." When they finally parted, Gu Yichen's ears, the only part of him that could still betray his emotions, were a brilliant, burning crimson. His eyes were wide, dazed, utterly gone. "You," he started, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat. "We're in public." Luo Ming grinned, that sleepy, cheeky grin that Gu Yichen had fallen in love with. "I know." The walk sign chimed, cheerful and insistent. Gu Yichen just shook his head, a helpless, adoring smile finally breaking through his cool facade. He tightened his grip on Luo Ming's hand and pulled him forward. "Come on, I'm walking you all the way home tonight. What about your place?" Luo Ming asked as they crossed the street. "It can wait." They walked on, past the crosswalk, past the point where they usually separated, all the way to the door of Luo Ming's building. They stood there for a moment, neither wanting to be the first to let go. "Same time tomorrow?" Gu Yichen asked. Luo Ming nodded. "I'll be napping on the bench." Gu Yichen smiled. "I know." He leaned in and gave Luo Ming one last kiss, soft, brief, a promise. Then he turned and walked away, his hands in his pockets, his steps lighter than they'd been in years. Luo Ming watched him go, a warm feeling spreading through his chest. Then he yawned, pulled open the door to his building, and went upstairs to take a nap. It had been a long day. A good day, but a long one. The next morning, Luo Ming arrived at school to find his usual desk transformed. There, next to his pillow, which Gu Yichen had long since stopped pretending wasn't a permanent fixture, was a small, wrapped package. He sat down, glancing over at Gu Yichen, who was already engrossed in a book, his face carefully neutral. But his ears gave him away. They were pink. Luo Ming unwrapped the package. Inside was a small, plush pillow shaped like a triangle. Stitched onto it in neat, silver thread were the words, "For math class." "I give up." Luo Ming stared at it. Then a laugh bubbled up from his chest. A real laugh, bright and surprised, loud enough to make a few heads turn. Gu Yichen finally looked up, his expression trying very hard to be indifferent. "It's a joke," he said, "because you never." Luo Ming leaned over and kissed him, right there in the middle of the classroom, before the first bell had even rung. It was quick, just a peck, but it was enough to send shockwaves through the room. "Best gift ever," Luo Ming said against his lips. Gu Yichen's entire face flushed. He looked around at the stunned, staring classmates and cleared his throat. "We're in public." "I know." Luo Ming finished for him, grinning. He settled back into his seat, tucking the triangle pillow under his cheek. "I don't care." And he closed his eyes, ready for his first nap of the day, a smile still playing on his lips. Gu Yichen watched him for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile of his own spread across his face, wide and unguarded and so full of love it was almost ridiculous. He reached over and gently brushed a stray lock of hair away from Luo Ming's face. In a quiet classroom, with the morning sun streaming through the windows and the bustle of students around them, the cold school grass and the sleeping bully existed in their own little world. The future stretched ahead of them, exams to fail, naps to take, kisses to share. There would be no drama, no rivalry, no plot to fulfill. Just them, just this, just the art of napping next to someone you love. And it was perfect,